Policy, Profit, and Perseverance. I'm Antonio Silas, and I have the distinct honor of serving as the president-elect of the National Society of Manners, and I sincerely appreciate each of you joining us today. Before we begin, I want to be intentional in recognizing the committee members who invested their time, ideas, and leadership in developing today's program. Kentaro Yamauchi, undergraduate student parliamentarian from Purdue University. Sarah Wilson, Region 2 undergraduate vice president from Florida A&M University. Jayla Lantigua, Region 4 undergraduate vice president from Purdue University, and Isaiah Massey, national parliamentarian and a professional with Corteva Agriscience. We have been very intentional in shaping a session that centers the student perspective and provides students with ample opportunities for them to share their experiences, ask questions, and contribute to the discussion. Today's session will explore how economic forces shape opportunities in agriculture, how policies and legislation affect agricultural leaders, and why understanding policy is essential for the long-term success within the industry. We will also discuss the importance of perseverance and how professionals can remain resilient while navigating changing economic, political, and regulatory environments. Although you will hear valuable perspectives from each of our panelists, this is not intended to be a lecture. We want this to be a genuine conversation. We encourage our students and all participants to ask questions, share their perspectives, and remain actively engaged throughout the session. We also invite you to stay connected with Manners beyond today's workshop. Whether you become a member, serve on one of our committees, or participate in future leadership and professional development opportunities, there are many ways to become involved and contribute to the continued growth of our organization. We're going to be providing QR codes with information about different ways to get involved and how you can join the organization at various points throughout this discussion. With no further ado, I would like to pass the baton on to Isaiah Massey, our national parliamentarian and moderator for this discussion.
Thank you, Silas. Welcome everybody. My name is Isaiah Massey. I am your current parliamentarian, and just like those QR codes that Silas was speaking about, here are our becoming a Manners member and a Manners Committee chairs member QR codes. So with Corteva Agriscience, and Ashley Johnson, principal with the Russell Group Incorporated. Thank you all for joining us. And if you all would like to give about a brief 1 minute description of who you are, what you do, and you know.
Isaiah may be having some technical issues, so ladies first.
Oh, beauty before age. Thank you, Karis. And thank you, Isaiah, and to Manners and to the Planning Committee. I'm really excited to be here with you all this afternoon. I want to say to the committee, thank you for planning and coordinating such an intentional conversation. And I'm going to do my very best to stick to all of the time constraints that you guys outlined here. My name is Ashley Nicole Johnson. I am from Arkansas. This is my 19th year here in DC. I work at the Russell Group. I serve as a principal. We are a bipartisan food, ag, and energy lobbying firm. We try to stay in our lane. I think I came into the agriculture industry after spending 2 years on the House side. I moved over to work on the Senate Agriculture Committee. I think I may have been the third person hired. And the reason I fell in love was I started to learn more about production ag. Being from Arkansas, I thought I grew up on a farm. Then I realized I really just grew up with my granddaddy grew a lot of stuff. tough because they had a lot of kids. But I learned so much about Production Ag from building teams on the Senate Agriculture Committee, and then had an opportunity to take that knowledge into USDA, and also into the White House, and then into my experience in corporate America, and finally here at the Russell Group as a multi-client lobbyist. I will pass the mic to Tony.
Thanks, Ashley. And good afternoon, everybody. Tony Watlington with the Director of Government Affairs with the Farm Credit Council. Really thank you to Manners for the invitation to be here today. I'm honored. And of course, we at Farm Credit and me, we really appreciate the partnership that we all have. Originally from Greensboro, North Carolina, so North Carolina guy, came to DC about 5 or 6 years ago, worked for Congresswoman Alma Adams, out of Charlotte, North Carolina. I said I'm from Greensboro, and I stayed in Greensboro for college, a graduate of the best HBCU in the country, North Carolina A&T State University. I got a degree in economics there, interned on Capitol Hill, came back and worked for Congresswoman Adams as a full-time staffer, doing some things on hunger, but then also handling a lot of her HBCU outreach. She's the godmother of HBCUs. So worked a little bit on the education portfolio. And Farm Credit was actually one of the companies that we worked with, kind of trying to build out pipelines of talent similar to Manners, kind of diversifying the field of agriculture. And so got recruited to come over to their government affairs team. So one of three, lobbyists here on the government affairs team. So we represent Farm Credit nationally. So there's, agricultural cooperatives nationwide lending to farmers and ranchers. When you look at the agricultural market, we lend to about half of American agriculture. And so, my job here really focusing in on Congress, our engagement with Congress, communicating internally what's going on in DC, kind of building some strategy around items that are important to us that help farmers and ranchers do their jobs better and help us make sure that that reliable and accessible credit is there. Also just finished up an MPA at George Washington University. But really, I know we're going to get into more discussion, but really happy to be here with you all today and looking forward to the conversation.
And I'll back clean up here. Good afternoon, everyone. Karis Gutter. I lead government and industry affairs for Corteva Agriscience. I've been with the company now for 11 years. And prior to joining Corteva, I spent 7 years at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And prior to that, 6 years on Capitol Hill leading ag policy. I really did unpack and develop my passion for agriculture while at USDA, though. And when I first got there, I actually thought that ag policy or agriculture was driven at the farm gate. But what I soon learned is policy is what puts the culture in ag. And so for the last 20 some odd years, I've been in DC helping to bring a bit of Terry, Mississippi into ag policy. I'm from Terry, Mississippi, attended Jackson State University, and like many of you, came up in farm communities or adjacent to the farm. Never did any labor that put dirt under my fingernails because I thought I was going to get off of the ag space as fast as I could. But life brought me right back into the agriculture space. Look forward to unpacking this conversation more as time goes on.
All right. Thank you, and sorry for the technical difficulties. So hopefully everything will be smooth here. Now, throughout our discussion, we're going to have some questions for our panelists, and for you who are engaging within this conversation, I just posted a link in the chat. We're going to utilize Slido, so you can ask any of your questions. If you click this link, it'll take you direct to where you can ask, and we'll be able to have some time at the end and potentially time within this panel to be able to ask some of these questions that you may have. And if there's a question that you were thinking about and it's already asked in that chat, you can upvote it, and kind of going to go on a basis of the ones that are more popular, the ones with the most upvotes that we'll ask the panel, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can that you as the audience have. So without further ado, we'll roll into our first question. So this is for the entire panel. Your organizations occupy different positions in the agriculture policy ecosystem. In practical terms, what does your organization focus on? Who do you serve or represent? And how does policy affect the economic decisions of your stakeholders?
It looks like we have a shy bunch, so I guess I'll go first. Again, Karis with Corteva Agriscience. And for those of you who may not be familiar with who and what Corteva is and does, we invest in seed innovations, crop protection, and biologicals. And at the lowest common denominator, that means everything starts with the seed before any crop can be grown. It's at the seed level. And so we put advanced genetics in those seeds. When you think about globally, mainly advanced diets today are rooted in what we call grains. And so Corteva really specializes in grains. We don't grow all crops, but we specialize in those grain and oilseed crops: corn, soybeans, canola, sorghum, wheat, as an example. And for all of those grain acres, we have to protect those acres with crop protection. Agriculture is one of the most highly and heavily regulated industries on the face of the planet. We're regulated by, at least in the United States, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Food and Drug Administration, right? And so, to the question of what do we do every day, our job is to know all of our stakeholders, all of those government agencies that regulate our business. We want to ensure that as we bring new products to market, they all require a registration. We have to submit those registrations to USDA, FDA, and EPA. We want to know who those regulators are, what their role is, and help explain to them the importance of our products. If they've got questions about our registration submission, we answer those. And we support that through those very same commodities. I mentioned corn, beans, cotton, canola, et cetera. We work with farm commodity groups that support those. So the government and the industry component. Last but not least, we're also regulated through the legislative branch of government, Congress. And so we work with Congress to ensure that they have the answers that they need. We do that at the federal and commensurately at the state and local levels too, all across the globe, wherever we do business. We do business in 130 countries around the globe. That's my time. I'll pitch it now to Tony.
Yeah, thanks so much. I work at a really cool intersection in agriculture, working at Farm Credit. So I mentioned before, we're kind of a network of cooperatives around the country, really focus on making sure that farmers and ranchers have those financing products that they need. So we're in pretty much every business line. If you think about a commodity, I guarantee you we finance it. We also do a lot of rural infrastructure, rural housing, but really making sure that folks have that credit. And so here in DC, my job is to hear the concerns of folks on the ground and relay that to Congress, right? When you look at Congress and the makeup of Congress, and also Farm Credit was started by Congress over a century ago to make sure that we can meet those credit needs, particularly in agriculture where we know the business can be very cyclical. It's a really, getting people to understand here in DC that putting something in the ground and hoping something comes out on the other side is a very risky business. And folks, my job is to make sure that they have the tools to be able to do that. And so we're regulated underneath both the jurisdiction of both the House and Senate Agriculture Committees. We also have an independent regulator, the Farm Credit Administration, that's right out in McLean, Virginia, maybe 20 or so minutes from Washington, D.C. But a lot of my job revolves around really the Farm Bill. I know we're in the middle of a big Farm Bill debate, but figuring out what ideas and proposals, maybe looking at working with USDA better to be able to raise loan limits when we work with them to lend to especially young, beginning and small farmers. Is there more that Farm Credit can do in the rural infrastructure space when we look at hospitals, education facilities, critical access facilities? So my job is to kind of look internally, see what proposals and things would help folks better meet our mission that Congress gave us to be able to serve agriculture, and then communicate that. Because when you look at the makeup of Congress, less and less folks come from rural communities, and even less have direct farming experience. So making that experience real to people really is really important, as well as working with an agency. I run a crop insurance work group, so Farm Credit also does crop insurance. So we're also looking at some proposals and working with USDA there. But so really understanding the broader ecosystem, both Congress and the agency over at USDA, and really being the conduit between local communities in DC. And with that, I'll pass it to Ashley.
Thank you, Tony. I think the beauty of this question, as you guys can already see, is that Tony, Karis, and I have all sat in different seats at the table in this industry. And that is something that I think has served us well professionally and personally. I am a multi-client lobbyist, so I get to represent companies like Corteva and organizations like Farm Credit Council, even though neither of them happen to be one of my clients. But y'all just come on over whenever you get ready. So we are a small firm. We have 6 registered lobbyists. 2 legislative assistants, a chief of staff, an operations director, and a special advisor that has kind of served at the very highest levels of government in food and ag. My job is about customer service. I service clients that are companies, so they have responsibilities to their customers, responsibilities to their employees, and responsibilities to their shareholders. I also represent trade associations that have responsibilities to their members who have all of the same responsibilities I mentioned just before now. I think my job now as a multi-client lobbyist is quite similar to being a staffer on the Hill, similar to being a staffer in an agency. It's all about, like, identifying goals and priorities that serve your client, your organization, and then figuring out how that translates onto the Hill, how that translates into the administration. You can go online and figure out what clients we represent, but just to name a few, we work very closely with Land O'Lakes, Kraft, Hormel. We do a lot in the food space. We also work with like the National Grain and Feed Association. So in the trade association space, I sometimes get to work with Tony on some farm credit issues because I represent a farm credit institution as well. So that's kind of a preview of what we do here at the Russell Group and in the multi-client space.
Absolutely. Really appreciate all of your input on that question. The next one, and we'll kind of go in reverse order. We'll start with Ashley. Um, what is one major agriculture policy or economic issue that students and emerging professionals should understand and how it could affect opportunity, profitability, or leadership in the sector?
So I gave this some serious thought, and I would also be interested in what my co-panelists have to say about this. I think one of the major shifts that's happening right now is the reorganization of USDA. I know Carson and I both spent, several years working at the agency, and that all 3 of us spend time now working with the agency. But when you talk about opportunities and professional opportunities and so forth, I think this reorganization is something for everyone to watch. This administration has a goal of kind of restructuring and shifting employees from the national capital region to other areas across the country. So you are seeing, a lot of folks having to relocate. We've seen over the past 2 years, a lot of folks leave government, whether, through retirements or taking like early retirement options. And then just people, just walking away or kind of sitting silently waiting to see where they may end up over the next couple of months. You are seeing a lot of this staff shifted to regional locations in Texas and Utah and Colorado, in Missouri and so forth. So I think that's something to watch, especially for students, I think, who may have had USDA on the job list, right? People that may be looking forward to, completing their degree or finishing their scholars program and transitioning to a job here in DC to work for one of the agencies at USDA. You may find now that those opportunities are not centralized here in the DC region, and will be kind of more spread out across the country. I think this is something important to watch. Another area, that we should be looking at in this is like how this impacts program delivery, how this impacts service delivery from USDA. We, like Tony said, are in the process of doing a farm bill. Better late than never. We're a couple of years behind on this, but if the Senate does move forward with a farm bill markup next week and we get into, a conference and final passage, then this USDA is going to have to implement that farm bill. So it'll be something to watch on how this reorganization and restructuring impacts the implementation of the farm bill. One final note that I'll flag about this is something to watch. It won't be immediate, so not year 1, not year 2, but think year 5 to year 10, in how this relocation of employees might change or shift the political footprints in some of these states and in some of these districts.
Yeah. I'll just mention, actually really good points, and I mentioned before, like, I think no matter where you are on the political spectrum, DC is a pendulum, right? And so things shift, administrations shift, priorities shift. And so I think when you think about long-term planning, as I mentioned, there's been a big exodus of folks for various reasons from, USDA, from the government in general. But, be thinking about what skills and things are going to be helpful and what connections are going to be helpful as you build out that ground game, not just now or next year, but for, looking at the next administration or looking at the next several years, because there's always going to be work here, right? And so as folks think about implementation and what that looks like, especially if we can't get a farm bill done or can't get a farm bill done, regardless, they're going to be really focused. A lot of people are going to be focusing a lot of energy and focus on the agency. So I think just making sure that we can't get lost in the moment of folks kind of leaving the agency and, leaving government. It's a pendulum, and I think things will swing back, and there'll be a lot of different opportunities over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think Ashley hit one of the major drivers and things to watch out for. We've been looking at some recent polling, and some of that polling tell us that cost and corruption are two of the most important things driving consumer and voter sentiment right now. And so, as you teed the question up, Isaiah, the farm economy, those costs are driving the day for a lot of us. And it's impacting the corporate sector's bottom line and how we make money. And so, not only is it something that we're very concerned about, it's something that's beginning to drive policymaker sentiment. It's driving how federal executive branch agencies begin to investigate corporate America. We've seen USDA and DOJ ratchet up some of their tone and some of their investigatory powers. We've seen congressional hearings begin to happen. My industry, the seed industry, is beginning to see more review. And we've even had trade associations and commodity organizations begin to call one another out when it comes to the price and cost of inputs. And so as we walk and work through this next chapter, some of the most pressing issues of the day relate to the economy. You asked in that question, though, what will the net result be? We're beginning to see that public and consumer sentiment have a larger and different voice in the context of influence. A good example is MAHA, or Make America Healthy Again. It's one of those rising sentiments where it doesn't have to be rooted in science. You don't have to be right. You just simply have to be convincing. And so we're beginning to see the consumer sentiment, which sometimes is not necessarily rooted in fact, drive the dialogue. It's driven with emotion. And so private sector companies and the agriculture industry is also beginning to see the remnants of some of that public sentiment.
Absolutely. And that is amazing input. And I mean, I learned a lot just from there about all the different things, especially that go into, the farm bill. And that's kind of going to segue us right here into our next question for Tony. Many students hear the phrase farm bill without completely understanding its practical reach. What is the farm bill and why does it come up so often? And how can its decisions affect credit, risk management, rural economics, or agricultural opportunity?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So for those who are unaware, Farm Bill is a large multi-year law that governs, much of our federal food and agricultural policy. It covers a lot of different areas over its titles, including, commodity programs, crop insurance, conservation, credit, which I mostly work with in Title V, rural development, research, trade, forestry, specialty crops, and nutrition. It really comes up so frequently because it's one of the primary ways that Congress establishes rules and resources supporting the agricultural economy. It also needs to be updated every 5 years. Well, we're a couple years late, as Ashley mentioned now. I think from the farm credit perspective, just to kind of put it in context for what I do, the Farm Bill matters because it influences that financial environment in which producers operate. And having a strong safety net from a bipartisan, full Farm Bill is critical for certainty for producers and for lenders such as ourselves. To make it real, for example, imagine a producer loses a significant portion of their crop because of drought. I work with a lot of crop insurance folks, and Farm Credit does a lot of crop insurance business. So that's going to be one of those certainty pieces that help, provide that certainty so folks can keep farming. It is a tougher time out there, particularly in certain states in the agricultural economy. Costs are going up, land values are going up. And so thinking about We've been doing this whole process for a couple of years now. As we mentioned, we're doing a farm bill, hopefully. And, we've been asking folks, what are the proposals and things as we think about reauthorizing a farm bill that are going to really help you as you're in these local communities as a cooperative, better serve our customers. And I think as we see those costs go up, folks are often calling us and saying, hey, there's a lot of pain out there. There's a lot of hurt. And so having the certainty of that farm bill that, builds a coalition of folks, typically, when you think about it, the agricultural community here in DC, it's really about building a coalition. So you think about, traditionally there's the, nutrition side of things, and then there's the farm program side of things, and typically divided among party lines. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is a big shift and a big division in that coalition, which is making it really hard to be able to get something done. But I think what everybody's experiencing, right, is as that cost rises, I think there's pressure on both sides of the aisle to try to get something done. But it's really the critical tool that updates a lot of these programs at the agency and in concert with private companies to be able to meet those needs of farmers.
And Ashley, if you'll allow me to go next, and you can talk about the politics. When you think about legislation typically does two things. It either authorizes or it appropriates, gives the authority to spend money on things. And what that farm bill really does is it provides the authority for the federal executive branch agencies to carry out those farm and ag support programs across the country. So it's the major authorizing bill for all of agriculture. Now, farm bills typically address crises in agriculture over history. Our first and earliest farm bills date back to the 1930s. They came about to address crisis in agriculture. We had the Dust Bowl, and that's what created the Natural Resources and Conservation Service. In the 40s, we had the Great Depression. The first credit programs, Tony, were created in the 40s. In the late 40s and 50s, we also had challenges abroad where the US was at war, and we had to fight through ag trade by ensuring that our products could feed hungry nations wherever they may be. We had surplus. We had to ship our products abroad to deal with bulk commodities, and we shipped those commodities. So every 3 to 4 years, we saw the beginning back in the 1930s with the Conservation Act, the first farm bills. And every 4 years, we had crisis in agriculture that we were responding to on the back of that. Today, we face a very different challenge and crisis in agriculture. When you wake up every day, we see crisis with tariffs. We see crisis in the Middle East. We see crisis in food security each and every day. And so one of the things that's most challenging at the farm gate, because we have a crisis in the farm economy right now, is the lack of a farm bill or the lack of certainty. That farm bill typically has brought 5 years of certainty, 4 or 5 years of certainty to the farm gate to know that the safety net programs are there, that the credit programs are there, that the conservation programs are baked in, the research investment is there for 5 years so that business and farmers are business owners. Farmers can invest in their businesses for the next 4 to 5 years without disruption. And so I'll now pitch it to Ashley because I want to be brief to talk about some of the politics of Farm Bill and what we're dealing with today.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know that I have a lot to say about the politics. But here's what I will say. For anyone that's been watching this Farm Bill process, we've had a lot of false launches, a House markup and a bill moved out of committee that didn't actually get voted on. So we redid it all again this year. The next couple of days, you guys, if you're really interested in farm policy, pay attention, follow all the ag press, like dial it in to see what's happening here. No, it's not lost on anyone that's been following this debate that the nutrition piece is a very, very big piece of this negotiation. The Title I issues, the Commodity I issues, some of the farm safety net programs that Karis and Tony talked about, those things have already been kind of done and completed through the reconciliation package. The One Big Beautiful Bill that was previously passed addressed a lot of those issues. Now that's why we're calling this Farm Bill 2.0, because it needs to deal with all of the policy pieces that were not able to be addressed in that reconciliation piece because they were connected to any money or budgetary items. So follow that. The biggest thing to see is that if we are going to get a bipartisan farm bill, Traditionally, I started on Capitol Hill in 2007. So 2008 was my first farm bill. Traditionally, farm bills have been passed on a bipartisan basis. That's why the coalition that Tony mentioned between the farm groups and the nutrition associations has been so important, so that we all can come together and find something. We sit down, make a grocery list, go shop, and come back and make a pie and slice it up, right? That coalition has worked so many times, and it has really been disrupted, I think, in this process of separating some of the biggest titles in the Farm Bill and kind of leading us here now to trying to rally support to move something along. So what you're going to be looking for over the next couple of days is whether or not we get some type of negotiation on the SNAP program and how states have to participate and kind of how they have to pay fees based on their error rates and the administrative costs. And that's going to be a big deciding factor as to whether or not you're going to be able to secure bipartisan votes on this package moving out of the Senate Agriculture Committee. So I think this conversation is very timely, especially for folks who are closely following. We always talk about ag policy and it sounds really sexy, but what does it do? This over the next couple of days will show you exactly how it works.
Wow. Thank you all for that amazing input. I feel like me personally, I've heard about the Farm Bill since high school and all the different implications that go into it, but never really had a very firm understanding of it. And after this conversation of answering that question, I feel like I at least have learned a lot from this here. These next few questions we're about to go into are going to be targeted to the individuals, a little bit more catered to your exact roles and then what you play in within the public policy part of the agriculture industry. So we'll start with Ashley. When you advise an organization, how do you translate legislative, regulatory, or political developments into a practical strategy? And what separates an organization that is merely reacting from one using policy knowledge as an advantage?
Yeah, this is the question I hope you guys don't put me on mute for. So that is a very sexy question, right? It's like, the legislative priorities and regulatory and political developments and so forth. And when you hear this, you think, oh, this is like thought leadership and, strategic, masterminding and so forth. But the real answer, the real truth is that most policy movement doesn't necessarily require a response. It doesn't always require an action. It doesn't always require some 10-point plan to how we get from A to B to Z and so forth. I think the biggest part, and I'll speak from my personal experience, is learning when to, like, how to differentiate the signal from the noise. Right. Like what is actually the problem? The way I approach clients when they're like, oh, we saw this might be happening, like, what do you think? And I say, well, one, what's the financial impact to your organization? What's the reputational impact to your organization? How does it impact your freedom to operate? Like, does it narrow your business opportunities? Does it restrict your ability to sell products or to move things, in commerce and so forth? And let's put a value on it before we go to thinking about whether or not we have the stakeholder relationships in order to be able to make withdrawals, right? Because in order to make a withdrawal, you got to have made deposits and like built up those relationships in order to be able to do that. Now, does it matter that we can defeat the issue? Or can we mitigate the issue? Can we just keep it from coming up? And how do we do that? I think so often we get so caught up in like, oh, this is like so legislatively and politically and dynamically, complicated. And it's really, I think the people that do it best are the people that are able to figure out how to stop screaming to the people that can hear them and start talking to the people who can help them.
Wow. I hope that everybody, as Ashley said, kept that unmuted because there were some amazing gems and nuggets that were in that piece right there. And I really appreciate your expertise and knowledge within that realm. As we move to our next question, it'll be for Tony. From the farm credit perspective, which policy and economic developments most directly shape access to capital and opportunity for farmers, ranchers, rural businesses, and rural communities?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As Ashley mentioned, we work with folks on the ground all the time, right? And I think trying to be an effective policymaker and lobbyist here in DC is about really getting a good understanding of the status quo. Folks come to us with issues all the time, right? And a lot of it is level setting and really doing a really good job listening to what and understanding what is the problem that we're trying to solve, right? If somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, we have this idea and concept. Can you help me think about this in a way?" We don't want to assume a solution, right? And sometimes as you think about your relationships that you've built over time, you think about what is the real intent? But is that a statutory thing? Is that already exist over at the agency? Is that something that needs a legislative fix? And how do we manage expectations about what's possible when we look at these different proposals, right? So I think, right now, as we've mentioned before, I mean, for us in the financial space, the cost piece is huge. We've been working with producers around the country. This is why we exist, right? Congress made us to be able to meet the moment in times like this. When you look at some states, you look at drought in the Southeast, to be able to refinance and retool those financing packages. But again, the certainty of that full 5-year farm bill updates a lot of the programs that we work with USDA with. And so we look at them as really close partners and trying to figure out, as we've worked with Congress to, figure out what those proposals are. If we look at the House markup and the House passed Farm Bill, we have, 7 proposals that we've worked on with local folks over the last couple of years that would help update a lot of those programs that are critical to farmers and ranchers. And so, the biggest thing is that cost piece right now and really being able to have the flexibility. If you look at Senator Bozeman, the chair of the Senate Ag Committee. If you look at Congressman Thompson, Chairman Thompson on the House Ag Committee, the leader, if you look at them, they're constantly talking about the farm economy. And that really is the name of the game as we look at our broader politics and talk about cost of living. If you look at the political spectrum right now, everybody's talking about that. And that continues to be our communication points, both internally and externally, is like, hey, we're here to meet this moment and meet those costs.
Absolutely. Thank you for your insights there, Tony. And I mean, it opened my mind to so many different things I've never even thought about that go into the credit and how it directly ties to what's going on in DC and the policies that are going on. And really appreciate your insight and expertise there. So our next question is for Karis. How do legislative and regulatory changes influence Corteva's decisions about innovation, product access, sustainability, productivity, and profitability? And how do leaders balance immediate business needs with long-term uncertainty?
Wow. Loaded question, but I would respond by saying the reason corporations have government and industry affairs teams is to help mitigate reputational and policy risk, right? And so if we're doing our jobs appropriately, there should be limited or no surprises in the government and policy space. It allows us to prepare for that. But in order to be prepared, we've got to have a good ground game. Policy is people, right? And so as it relates to our ground game, it means us having the best relationships across the board in the map. I mentioned earlier those primary stakeholders. The reason we really dive deep in understanding who those stakeholders are is we need friends and relationships before we need them, right? And so ultimately, when you think about agriculture, our on the Hill, our company is regulated or under the jurisdiction of the agriculture and the environment type committees. And so we want to know every member, every staff who works for and makes decisions on those committees. We want to make sure they have the information that they need. The same thing on the executive branch side. We want to know who's going to be reviewing our dossiers, what the steps are, how long it's going to be on their desk, and what it takes to get that dossier moved from step 1 to step 5, right? And so it's really about building relationships, creating more certainty, to go back to your question, as we can. Because most often what we can do in the government industry affairs space is to impact policy, timing and tone of that policy conversation. We want to ensure that it's not a highly charged environment. We want to de-escalate tensions where they are. We want to excite and motivate emotions when we can. And we also want to drive a sense of urgency or tap the brakes in instances where things are moving too quickly. So again, if we're doing our jobs appropriately, we are helping with certainty in the business so that there are fewer surprises. But undoubtedly, this administration, we've had some unprecedented surprises, right? From tariffs coming out on Friday to having to deal with what do we do about them on Tuesday. And when that does happen, we open up lines of communication, the ability to put in a phone call to USDA or USTR so that we better understand the policy, what they're attempting to do, and how we can help support them achieving their goal with minimal disruption to our business as possible is one of those objectives.
Thank you, Karis. I really appreciate that, the context to that, and especially, just trying to imagine, I'm sure the tightrope that you all work on every day with all of the different things you have to juggle, not only within your current jobs, but especially balancing those relationships. And as you described, the ground game, and I kind of think that back to football, having good consistency with those connections and trying to get ahead of the ball rather than be behind it. And I think that's something that we all can appreciate and can apply to every aspect of our lives, not just within public policy. The next question will be for everyone, and we can start with Tony on the answer. So this is a little bit about resilience. So can you share an example of a policy, legislative, economic, or regulatory change that required an organization or sector to adapt? What made the response resilient, and how can policy literacy become a competitive advantage for leaders?
Wow, what a question. I'll give a good example. I know Ashley, my colleague Ashley Johnson over here, has worked on this kind of proposal with me. Cara's mentioned a strong ground game. One of the things that I mentioned before was figuring out ways that, Congress can do a lot more in the rural development space. Again, we touch a lot of different areas with the credit space, right? Like we're touching, the row crops, we're touching rural housing, rural development. And we're working very closely with USD on a lot of these different things. And so one of the things we heard from our farm credit institutions across the country is when we think about rural communities, we don't want to lose population there. We want people to be there. We want those to be thriving communities that have the access to services that they need. And so one of the things that we realized is years ago in previous farm bills was we farm credit can do more in the rural infrastructure space. So I mentioned before hospitals, senior care, walk-in clinics, schools, child care facilities, those community facilities, right? And so we had a program where we partnered with USDA to be able to get those programs done. Now that was a pilot program that expired, and so that and our regulator was approving those on one-on-one basis, and so it was just getting too much red tape. And this is a great example of us coming to the table with a lot of different organizations, the National Farmer Cooperatives, National Association of Counties, National Rural Health Association. So we built a good, that's how we think about legislation, right? We think about, we think about the political connections we have, but also how do we work with other stakeholders and other groups to really build that coalition to push for things that make sense. And so I mentioned as part of that farm bill that passed the House, we had a provision in there called the Investing in Rural America Act that would codify our ability to do more in partnership with other lenders. So it's a good example of, how do we take a proposal from beginning to end over the last several years and think about, hey, this is something that's important. Now let's create the materials, the coalition, the communications plan, all the different aspects that allow us to get to a point where we have a policy that we have buy-in on both internally and externally that's part of a broader package so that we can go to Congress and say, hey, here's the need, here's why, who cares about this? Because when you're talking to folks, DC is a very busy place. If you might catch folks one time and that's your chance, you got to be ready. And so doing that good ground game, that good work and thinking about the strategy and leveling expectations internally before you get to that point, get you to a point where you can, really be offensive and think about these different proposals.
Can I do a quick amen on Tony's point, you guys? I mean, from a personal perspective, this has been the Investing in Rural America Act has been one of the most personally rewarding experiences and issues that I've had an opportunity to work on through this Farm Bill reauthorization process. I'd kind of fancy myself being a daughter of rural America, coming from Southwest Lower Arkansas, SWLA. And so, this for places like where I'm from will strengthen, like whether or not people have an urgent care or, child care center runners and so forth. And as somebody, that had like severe health issues as a child, whether or not they got to drive 3 hours to see a specialist and so forth. And so these investments in community facilities are so extremely important. I will just put one thing on your radar is something that remains to be seen, how companies respond and how resilient and who wins on this. It's going to be the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again space. And it's all about our food, you guys. And it's not just about the dyes that are going to be in there or the labeling. It's about like how the crops are even being cultivated and produced, what crop protection products are allowed to be used on them, and how those things make it to the marketplace. And so you're going to see a lot of food companies, input companies, a lot of the kind of the health associations and so forth, working on this issue. It's not a partisan issue. Dems and Republicans care about this a lot, but the future of our food is going to be, I think, a lot of determining factor. The MAHA movement has had a lot of acceleration this year and over the past couple of months. I think you're going to see that passion turn into legislative strategy in the next Congress, in the 120th. So I think that's something that it remains to be seen which companies meet the moment and how they do so, whether or not we have some type of federal preemption on how products are labeled and described, and then who has access to what products, whether that is in the school nutrition programs or even in the food assistance programs.
Yeah. What's crazy here is I'm caught slipping here, taking notes as I'm on the panel. This is pretty awesome. What's awesome to see here also, though, is the passion at which manners professionals bring to the work that we do. I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing over the past 11 years at Corteva, because each one of us as manners professionals, we bring that manners tenacity to work with us each and every day. Over that 11 years, when I first started with Corteva, we were DuPont at the time, and we were focused on bringing more biotechnology innovations to market. Now, we had 30 years of Part 340 when GMOs had been on the market, and we begun the journey towards creating a path for new innovations, gene editing, CRISPR-Cas9 as an example, to come to the market. And so that meant we needed to write new regulations and new laws to regulate gene editing. And so we were part of that, successfully a part of that. Some of the most meaningful updates in 30 years in biotech policy. After we got it across the finish line, we also had to fight and debate GMO labeling, as an example. Tough, transparent conversation where we had to come to grips with people simply wanted to have a more public conversation about what's in their food, and we're still dealing with that today. I'm going to walk you through time where we've had trade discussions in Mexico. Lopez Obrador came out with a decree, the former president of Mexico, saying that he wanted to ban GMOs in corn in Mexico. And so as the number one corn provider in the world, Corteva Agriscience, that was a threat to the business. And so we had to build a coalition to push and fight back on those kinds of restrictions. Ultimately, Mexico put in place a constitutional amendment regarding that, and we're still pushing on that. And so we worked with the U.S. government to bring the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement, a USMCA case against Mexico, where we were successful in winning, and Mexico unrolled many of those restrictions that they had in place. We've had some big wins over the 10 years, but at the core of that, we've had a good hand in helping to shape over the last decade food and ag policy. And the beauty and the fun part of it, as Tony and Ashley both pointed out, whether it's fighting for food and nutrition, fighting for rural development and rural America and credit, but also fighting in the food security space, manners professionals have been at the forefront of that.
Absolutely. And we appreciate all of your input on that question. Now we're about to move into the student questions that they have. So the first one that I'm going to pose is from Kelsey Parker. It said, how do you measure success in government affairs when policy change often takes years to happen?
Well, I'll take the first stab at it since they are slow to take themselves off of mute. My initial response is the tree in the forest analogy. If the tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, Did it make a sound? It's our responsibility to tell our story and help define what success is. And there are times where, at least in the government and industry affairs space, we get to shape the narrative. I mentioned earlier timing and tone. It's a skill, and it's the one lever that we have. We have the ability to elevate, we have the ability to help shape and tell that story. We're also very skilled in knowing who to tell that story to. So, about as much as we are successful at being a lobbyist for our companies, we also have to be lobbyists at telling the great work that we do. And so, the success really in the government industry affairs space comes from how we talk about what success and victory in this space is.
I second that.
I third it.
Beautiful. We'll roll into the next one. So this is from Sierra. How can we stay updated with what's going on with the agriculture policy? Is it through podcasts, social media? What would you all recommend in order to stay updated?
All of the above. And here's one thing that I do challenge folks. If you have a mentor or you are a mentor, think about if your mentor says, like, how can I help you? Like, what's something I can help you with? Maybe ask them to help you with an annual subscription to a news source, right? To one of the Agri-Press news sources, so that you can track issues and stay up to speed on what's happening in this space. I think that is so important. I get up every morning and I have a podcast set list. I listen to AgriPulse, I listen to NPR, I listen to Punch Bowl, I listen to Politico, Politico, like Start the Day, right? I go through those, and then when I finish, I go on to my True Crime podcast. But that's how I start. And I think I think having that connectivity, staying present, making sure that you have access. So if you have a mentor and they offer you something, maybe ask for a subscription, because those things can be sometimes an investment. If you are a mentor and you have the resources, maybe make that investment in your mentee, so that they can stay connected, because it's so fast paced. I think we're all great lobbyists, but sometimes some of the stuff we learn comes from reading or listening to those sources. So I would just encourage you guys to do that.
One other point I'd make there too is just understand things act specific, but also keep in mind the broader political environment. We talked about coalitions and getting things done, like understanding the broader environment and tone of like DC and what's going on is really important when you think about windows of opportunity to get things done. So we have a midterm election coming up. Pay attention to what happens. There's going to be a lot of new members of Congress, a lot of new opportunities from different places in different states. So, and as you build that knowledge over time, you can start to see kind of how to be more offensive on things.
Thank you for answering that. Our next question is from Zachary Bonser. So he first wanted to thank the panel for their insight, and he wanted to share what are your thoughts and experiences when it comes to representing and advocating for people that don't look like us, that are in DC, and trying to get those same policies passed on, trying to bridge that gap of knowledge between two different cultures.
Yeah, all about bridging the gap. Ultimately, we bring to the job each and every day who we are, where we come from, in our way of life. And oftentimes, at least with me, I walk into rooms where I am in the minority. And so when you use that as the example, that's every day. Uh, but one of the things that's very important is to ensure that you are well read, you understand your material, and you can clearly communicate effectively your perspective. But I would always encourage us, don't shy away from ensuring that we are who we are. Every day when I come, and then this is one of the things that I will lean into just a little bit. Wherever I go, I'm from Terry, Mississippi. I know that no one else is going to represent Terry, Mississippi, because it ain't but 500 of us. Everywhere I go, I'm going to represent New Galilean Missionary Baptist Church. That's my home church, 3830 Flagship Road, Jackson, Mississippi. Everywhere I go, I'm going to represent the United States Marine Corps, because I joined right out of high school. And the reason I'm giving those examples, each and every experience that you've ever had is a part of who you are, and it's what you get to bring to the walk each and every day. It's that perspective that makes us unique. When I first got to DC, everybody had a story. They would always talk about how they were a first or fifth generation farm kid from you name the state. I didn't have that story. I had to share my own perspective. I would encourage us to not shy away from, be ashamed of the story that we have. It's a rich story, and it's one that we should be sharing and embedding into that walk. But also, again, reading your material, knowing your work.
Yeah, and I'd also just mention understanding your story, understanding that your story is really valuable, right? A lot of these rooms can be, a little bit of a monolith, right? It's you're going to see the same stories, the same things, but your perspective is important. I mentioned before, like Congress is changing. There's a lot of different folks, and though I don't come from a true agricultural background, my folks are all from rural communities and understand the challenges of what that looks like, right? And so I think whatever your story is, whatever your niche is, figure out how to communicate that and what is your strength? What is your strength in your story? And where do you fit into the ecosystem and where can you, make impact and be effective? Because we need different, folks need different opinions at the table, right? And you'd be surprised when you start to talk about that experience and the skill sets and the perspective, folks will be a lot more receptive than a lot of people think.
Can I say one thing, you guys? I don't know if y'all have experienced this, but sometimes when you go into a new work environment or you're talking to somebody and you work in agriculture, they're like, "Oh, well, did you grow up on a farm?" Like, "Oh, did you da 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 da?" It's you've got to, but have you noticed like if you work on like financial services issues, nobody asks you if you're an accountant. If you work on trade, nobody asks if you're an international specialist. They don't ask defense LAs whether or not they were in the army or served in the military or anything like that. And so I think we have to divorce ourselves a bit from some of these strongholds that we've placed on ourselves about like, oh, you're not policy enough, or oh, you're not farm enough, you're not ag enough. And then I just want to give like I do think that even based upon the amount of people on this webinar, based upon the Manners Policy Summit, based upon the success of, I think, Black professionals in food and ag here in DC, the bench is deep and it is ready. And I feel like there has been so much work done to make sure that we are showing up in every space, because every space matters. But I do want to just make sure like that people don't get discouraged by like or saying like, oh, I didn't come from a farm, but no, I didn't come from a farm, but here's what I bring to the table. Because those requirements aren't placed on people in other portfolios. Healthcare LAs didn't used to be nurses. So I would just tell us to divorce ourselves from being kind of narrowed and stuck in this space that, oh, I can't do this or I have to shy back from that because I didn't grow up on a farm.
Absolutely. And those were all amazing key points that I think we all can relate to and all have lived through. And it's something that I agree with you, Ashley, definitely trying to divorce that notion. I never really thought of it that way, where, a lot of people don't ask that question in other industries, but they definitely ask it in ours. And I think that's extremely valuable. Now, in consideration of time, we're going to ask one last question. And it's something I saw as a common theme within the Slido as well as a panel. So I'm going to try to mix it in as one. For students who may be majoring in other avenues outside of public policy, but are still in the agriculture degree path. What would be any advice for those who are interested in getting into federal state agriculture work? And what is like some skills that might not always be taught in the classroom that will be definitely be needed when they're on the Hill?
Well, look, I didn't major in any ag discipline. I was a political science major, and my superpower is being able to count votes. And even today, I don't claim to be an ag policy professional. I've just been doing it for 25 years. So I guess time has made me more of an expert. But my first love and my expertise is politics, understanding constituencies, understanding the votes. I think earlier in the segment, I mentioned polling. While many of my colleagues are reading ag economic reports from NASS that just came out today, I'm looking at morning consult so that I can understand where voter sentiment is going. Because at the root of it, those are the kinds of things that are going to drive the future. So I would not shy away from being who you are and leaning into what your expertise is. Understand what your superpower is. But I would also say if you want to learn and grow more into the ag space, come on, let's do more of it if you want to learn more of it. There are two types of experience. There's work experience, there's education experience. You can get that kind of experience either in the classroom or you can come and join us at Corteva AgriScience and we can give you some work experience.
And for folks, I'll just say, I was a political science and journalism major, and I couldn't afford to come to DC for an internship. So I reached out to my congressman's local office and I interned there. Right. And so when people say, oh, what to do if you don't have Hill connections, get some. Like just think outside of the box. Every internship is not in the DC area. So figure out ways to get plugged in on the state and local level. I think it will really serve you well, and will really help you kind of propel yourself into the next level of your career. I also think, like being intentional about building a network. And making sure that network doesn't just work for you. I think that's one of the biggest things that has helped all of us kind of navigate around this circle and staying in the industry, but moving and working into different parts. So I would just recommend, relationships you can build. Building relationships is not something that's often taught in the classroom, but if you're intentional about it and you are making investments in doing it and you are sincere, it will serve you well long term in your career planning and kind of what your professional blueprint looks like.
Yeah, I'll also mention, take advantage of the resources that you already have. Like, so when you get to these networking opportunities, your resume is updated. And I know Manners provides a lot of really amazing things. And of course, colleges and universities you all are at provide a lot of good things. But, just make sure all the material is ready, prepped, you understand kind of what you have an idea of. You're not going to know everything, right? I think really life's about just figuring out how to have experiences. How do you know what you don't know? Right? You just have to go try something. But action is always better than inaction, and then you get closer and closer to building a career. So,
And I know we may be at time, but I also want to double back and give a huge shout out. As I look around the screen, I see people who are pivotal to this walk. As I finished college, I was unemployed for 6 months. I was sitting on my dad's couch, and he told me, "Son, I've done my part. You need to get a job." I had to reach out to my advisors, my faculty advisors at Jackson State, my key professors. And when I look around the screen, I see names like Zachary Brown and Antonio McLaurin, who are some of those advisors. So if you're looking to, continue that walk and that journey, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to your advisors, work with Ebony and team. You've got a community here to help you.
Absolutely. Ashley, Tony, Karis, absolutely thank you for your time. This has been completely valuable and something that I think we all can say we've learned a lot, and it's something that we all were very interested in. And there's so much that we have been able to digest about public policy, as well as with your own general walks in your career, as well as all of the different things and great pieces of advice you provided for us. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Antonio Silas for further remarks, and I'm going to share a general reminder about if you're interested in becoming a Manners member or committee chair, we're going to share those QR codes here again, and then I'm going to pass it back to our president,
and Isaiah, if I could make one
Antonio
more
Silas.
selfish plug real quick. If you want to be part of this network, of course, Ashley and Cars mentioned Black Professors in Food and Agriculture. I'm really, really proud to serve as the president of that organization. I just put the link in the chat. Please sign up for our alerts. The spirit of what we're talking about here today, the network, the professional development, we're working on a really great plan to continue the work of doing that as we think about these jobs and opportunities. So please sign up for our newsletters and communications, and we'd love to have you as part of that network as well.
Absolutely.
Mr. Watlington, Mr. Gutter, Ms. Johnson, thank you so much for doing exactly what I knew you all would do, be very knowledgeable and give our students some important things to think about and some important resources and perspective. So just a few things. First and foremost, if you are not a member of Manners and you like what we have to offer, this is just one of our many offerings as a national organization. So we have a QR code for different levels of Manners membership, whether you are a graduate student, an undergraduate student, a professional, or somewhere in between. You will find your appropriate path on that page. Also, with respect to the Manners members in the room, committees have been incredibly integral and impactful in the work that we've been able to do over the course of this last year and even prior to that. So if you found value in this, if you have ideas that are similar that we could blast out to the Manners membership, we want to make sure that we are leveraging our collective talent. So please, by all means, sign up for a committee. We want to make sure our offerings are relevant and impactful to all of our members. So we need to hear your voice and we do need your involvement. You'll see a variety of different links posted in the chat. I would say to ensure that we are delivering relevant content, please ensure that you fill out the feedback form. That is very, very critical to us so that we can continue to improve in the offerings that we have to provide. Once again, the committee link is there for you. The dates for the Manners Leadership Academy are September 24th through September 26th. That will be taking place in Atlanta, Georgia. Information is contained in the chat regarding that. And last but certainly not, well, not even last, but also Manners 41 in San Diego is going to be March 31st through April 4th. So I'm looking forward to interacting with some people, and thank you very much for the resource on screen, interacting with some people and building some relationships there. And lastly, I just want to ditto what Tony shared about BPFA. I had the honor of serving as the treasurer for BPFA for the last leadership cycle, and I was able to build a lot of really meaningful relationships and learn a lot about policy and gain some context that I did not have previously. So if BPFA is of interest, the link to that information is also included in the chat. I think that about covers it for me. So I would like to sincerely thank everyone for being a part, for taking part in this incredibly important discussion, and be on the lookout for Manners Includes session number 3, which will be coming up very, very soon. And we'll be sharing information about that as well. Thank you so much. I hope everybody has a great day.